Welcome to Ike's Flame. Join us on another Star Wars adventure. Punch it, Chewie. Yeah, I mean, first off, I just want to like, if you guys have watched, I know you mentioned kind of like they get into a little bit more of this in Legends and some of that sort of thing. If you guys have watched season 7 of the Clone Wars, I think of the scene after Ahsoka has captured Maul and Sabine. They put Maul in the this, I mean, containment box cell thing, and or not Sabine, but who am I thinking of? Bo-Katan says something about like, well, this is the last one we have. When we you used to have a reason to basically contain you Force users talking to Ahsoka, and so like I mean, just even in that, that is another reference just for you guys listening. If you
I
guys
forgot
watched
about that. That's a
season
very good
seven of
catch.
season 7 of Clone Wars, and so um, yeah, I think it's the for me like the Mandalorian. It's the I think the Mandalorian kind of uh the creed and the culture around that. One thing I think of, and maybe this part of the reason I connect with this a little bit is because I grew up in a specific religion. I grew up Christian, and like I've always been in the Christian church, and always been like that is part of who I am, and I would almost say part of who I am culturally. And so, and I think like from I look at like the Mandalorians, it's culturally who they are, is part of that idea, and I find it really interesting the um with like Din Djarin and like Mando and how he was brought into this. He's learning. He doesn't have the I was raised in this. This is like who I am. He was brought. I mean, there's the whole idea of the foundling that they kind of explore within the Mandalorian, and like each season we see him learning more and more about the Mandalorian culture, and so I think it. Yeah, and so I think it's an interesting concept and idea to like look at a because there's so many people in the world that grow up like within a religion, like as almost as their cultural background. And not that I'm not. I think that's not a bad thing at all. But it's also like interesting when you kind of get an outsider coming into that, and it gives a whole new perspective to it. That I think we're kind of seeing with Mando, and it's a great for me. I found it as a really great storytelling arc, and way they have done that is like, hey, we're going to bring somebody from the outside in to help explore what it means when we say this is the way or the Mandalorian creed and all these things. And so I think that's been really interesting to me as they've done that, and as they've kind of like had this way of storytelling and helping us dive into Mandalorian lore. And I mean, because I think for a long time, like if there was a lore that people wanted to dive into that wasn't Jedi or Sith, like it was Mando's. Like that was the lore that people wanted to dive into. And so it's a very interesting way to storytell and to have that kind of idea and concept of coming into a cultural religion from the outside.
It's a very good point. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, because it's interesting. I was just trying to look up. You might be able to remember the name, but they said it, I believe, in Ahsoka, which is there's a type, the Jedi that weren't raised in the Order. You know, Ezra's classed as one, Luke's classed as one. I can't remember what the term is. It's if you can remember, I'm trying to look it up, but I'm trying to remember. It's a type of Jedi. Oh God! I just tried to look it up and open a YouTube video accent. I'll remember it and I'll mention it in a bit rather than just fumbling and spending this time. But it is very interesting because when you have certain people raised in the religion, you know, Jedi is one of them, but then you get people who do find it partway through. And I've got friends, like I spoke to my friend Tonya Todd on Genuine Chit-Chat, and we spoke about religion quite a bit, and she wasn't raised religious. And she spent a part of, I think it was either her youth or sort of being a young adult, kind of just looking around at different religions and being like, oh, this one has these problems I don't like, or I don't feel welcome in this sort of religious sect. And she's found her own religion. And from talking to her, you wouldn't expect her necessarily to be a religious individual. Not that that's a problem in
Yeah.
any way, but I found that everyone finds their own spirituality in different ways. And, I mentioned my dad earlier, and my dad was an agnostic. He didn't necessarily believe in anything overtly, but I remember just at like snippets of almost like a compilation in my mind that he always believed he had some sort of guardian angel. And he always believed that it was an Indian gentleman. He never explained why. He just said at certain points in his life, major points in his life, he would always notice this guardian angel kind of looking over him and things like that. And it's really interesting because everyone has their own path to spirituality, I find. And I think that for a lot of people, whether or not they kind of realize it, I think Star Wars can really open one's eyes to the possibilities. Because, at the end of the day, I mean, the Jedi, although they have magic powers, essentially, it is a religion,
Yeah.
You can have Force sensitives who don't necessarily believe in a religion. The Jedi and the Sith are the main ones, but you've got plenty of Force sensitives in the canon, mainly in Legends, but quite a few in the canon, like Maz Kanata and people like that, who can use the Force to some extent, are Force sensitive to some extent, but don't necessarily follow a specific set of rules. They just kind of go their own way. And that's one of my favorite things about a lot of the new Star Wars canon is the exploration of not grey Jedi like they do in Legends, but kind of people who aren't necessarily pure good or pure evil. I like the archetype of the story, good versus evil. The original trilogy is quite easy to consume because it's quite simple.
Yeah.
You got a big evil fascist empire and you got some good guys. It's quite easy going. When you get into like the minutia of what is good and what is bad, and I think the MCU with Infinity War and Endgame kind of touched upon that, more so in Infinity War. When you get villains, and Black Panther has it as well, when you get villains who have really good points, but the way they go about certain things is just a bit too extreme in certain ways, for me, I find that the most intriguing, because when you've got someone who's just like Palpatine, no one sympathizes with Palpatine. He's just a really evil old dude who wants to control everything. You sympathize more with Vader because of how Anakin was and his gradual fall.
Yeah.
And there's a book by Delilah S. Dawson called Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade, which I have behind me here.
Yes, that's a great book.
Oh, phenomenal. I think it's one of the best books in the canon. And I think that really shows, along with when you see stuff in Clone Wars, the real failings of the Jedi, where you can have an institution that's meant to be, air quotes, good, but because of its own hubris, its own dogma, it can twist individuals or groups into ways in which do not actually reflect the core message. And I think that's one of the big issues I have with religion in certain ways. It's like I never necessarily believed this element, even at my most sort of militant, but it's like you can't compare the everyday average Christian to the Westboro Baptist Church. They're not the same thing. They claim to be, the Westboro Baptist Church kind of claim to be preaching, the same kind of stuff, but they're not. Their actions clearly speak much louder than the doctrine they allegedly follow. And I think that the parallels you can draw with Star Wars, one of the reasons it hits people so hard is because if you're not religious or you or agnostic, you can be like, oh, cool, there's wizards in space that have magic powers, and everyone, when they're a kid, maybe some as an adult like myself, occasionally go, what if today's the day? What if today I can move something with my mind if I just focus hard enough? What if I close my eyes and hear that weird noise enough? Maybe I can do it, and everyone wants that. And it's got this wonder about it. And Yoda, I mean, Yoda is like a really, really religious old dude, but no one really, even people who aren't that religious, don't perceive him as this preachy old priest. They just, they see him as a wise old, cool, almost frogman. And so I really like how Star Wars does manage to balance the spirituality side of things without it being too heavy-handed.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think two things I kind of want to kind of pull out of what you just said is like one, like, and you mentioned like Christianity, like the Westboro Baptist Church and Christianity, and like how there's on a line. And I think that is one thing, like for me personally, like I've had to come to terms with within being a Christian is like and probably a lot of religions. I mean, I don't have experience with other religions as much, but just like not all Christians are going to be perfect. Like, I mean, no Christian is going to be perfect. No human's going to be perfect. And like mistakes are going to happen. People are going to get hurt. And like, I mean, one thing that like we like, um, so I mean, just I don't know if you know this. So I'm actually on staff at a church. So I'm a pastor. So like for me, like one thing I talk about a lot is this idea of what we call church hurt, and this like people that get hurt by for whatever reason by the church or by a religion, and like that's real. And I just like I just want to acknowledge that, like for any of you guys listening, like that is real. And um I understand that that is a problem. And so I think also, but that also relates to um this idea of like the Force. And I think especially during the Galactic Public Clone Wars age, like the Jedi didn't realize what they were doing, didn't realize they were hurting people, didn't realize they were um having all these issues. And so and kind of like you said, their hubris was too big for what they could handle. And so um I just think like all that is legit and real. And I think the other side of that too is, and even just this idea of kind of the outside looking in. And I don't remember what that term is they use in Ahsoka either, but but I think like going back to maybe a very controversial movie, but The Last Jedi, um, part of the reason, and as I've watched The Last Jedi more and more, I think the more I like it.
Hmm.
Um, because I'm starting to see that like Luke has an outside perspective of the Jedi. Luke is realizing, hey, the Jedi really screwed up. They're like I mean, like yeah, I'm a Jedi, but Jedi really screwed up. And I think like that is why like I think all of that, and as he even as he's training Rey, like he wants Rey to understand, hey, the Jedi really screwed up. And like for me, like if I'm teaching a student about like our church or whatever it is, like I'm not going to sit here and tell them like, hey, we've always been perfect. Like we've messed things up at times. And like I know that may be like a harsh thing to say, or like might make people upset, but that is the reality of it. And I mean we have to be honest with ourselves. And so I think also like so I really appreciate kind of The Last Jedi and the look at that. And I will be very interested, with that said, where they go, like where when they do the Rey movie with like the new Jedi Order, like what does that look like? I mean, I really hope we get kind of Dawn of the Jedi type of feel, with like kind of going back to the origins of the Jedi, and like where they started and like how they did that. And I even appreciate like in Mando and Book of Boba Fett, like we see Luke building a temple that is very I mean, obviously this is before the sequels, but Star Wars timeline, but we see Luke building a temple that is um, very not
Not
like,
grandiose, is it? It's quite
yeah, not
simplistic.
grandiose. It's not on Coruscant. And I'm trying to think, was it in?
Is it
I think it's
Book of Boba
Master.
Fett? Is it when? Oh, sorry, you're talking
Yeah,
about something
yeah,
else.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But yes, I think it's Book of Boba Fett. But I think it's Master and Apprentice, and maybe even some of the High Republic. There's a little bit of conversation about like why is the main Jedi temple on Coruscant? Like, shouldn't we have it in a more simple place? Like,
Hmm.
and like, and so like I think that just that notion and that idea behind all that is like really like intriguing, because I think sometimes I don't really think about that. It's like, oh yeah, Coruscant, it's the center of the galaxy. Obviously, it makes the most sense. But like, I really appreciate the fact that like even in the High Republic, we see Jedi training at Jedi temples on other worlds,
Hmm.
and things of that nature. And I mean, I don't know if you watched the like the kids High Republic show.
Young Jedi
Um,
Adventures. I've seen up to the point where Bell and Loden Greatstorm appear.
okay,
I've watched about half of it.
okay, yeah, I don't think I've caught up completely, but like just even then, like we see those kids, they're not training a course. I don't even remember what planet it is now, but it's a mid rim outer rim planet. And so I also just think like when we think about all those aspects, and it kind of went all over the place here, but like it's interesting to think like, hey, like let's expand where we're at and not get so stuck in one spot. And I think sometimes I wonder if that's why The Last Jedi is so controversial, because it feels like we're pulling away from the prequels Jedi and the what the Jedi is supposed to be as we see it in the prequels. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of cool things about Clone Wars and prequels and all that dives into the Jedi, but also like is Luke seeing a bigger picture here and trying to that's what he's trying to teach Rey, I think, in a lot of ways.
I mean, what you said, I want to quickly note that Bokken Jedi, I looked it up. Bokken
yes.
Jedi, that's what Ezra,
Yeah.
Shin Hati is, and Luke, which is Jedi trained as Padawans after the fall of the Order. So Bokken. So for anyone shouting at us for that. Second of all, I want to say, I really appreciate your honesty there, Ike. With yourself being involved in the church, having your career entangled with your religion, and having that openness to accept that, because there's individuals I've come across in my life who are religious and who will not acknowledge some of the things that have been caused. And I'm British, okay? Yeah. The majority of world atrocities that occurred before sort of the 1900s, some since, but the majority of them before then was us. Nowadays we like to, especially since sort of, the world wars and things, we like to think of ourselves as quite nice individuals who saved the world from fascism. Yay. But we were the world fascists before, It's something I've been thinking about, and our school system doesn't talk about that very much. And I think reform is a really important element. And I think that with Christianity, and to an extent, but a lesser extent, Catholicism, which obviously kind of come from a similar branch, is that once you acknowledge these atrocities occurred, you can start to repair the wounds. You can start to look at, right, why did these things happen? What were the problems with these things? But if you never accept there were these problems, two issues occur. One of which is, how do you heal? How do you learn from those things? As you say, no humans are perfect. I think Jesus was probably the closest. I'm an atheist. I believe he existed. He was pretty close, but even he had faults and flaws and things with what he did. And he was learning as he was being human on earth as well. And it's all this part of just learning, and being a human is just this journey of trying to be better. And with religion as well, is that if you abstain completely from acknowledging any of the atrocities, be it a religion, be it an organization, be it a country, then people will resist. People won't be able to take that. But if you're open and honest, just like, no one's perfect. I've made mistakes in my life. I've made mistakes in my current relationship, nothing, major, but we've had arguments. It's been my fault or stuff like that. But if you acknowledge that and you apologize and you try and, make it right and things, you can come out feeling even stronger and more connected. But if you reject any issue occurred and you refuse to grow from it, then that's when the problems occur. And I think you hit the nail on the head then. So really hats off to yourself. Like I already respected you, but that knowing that's one of the things you practice is an incredible feat to do in your job and in your life. So thank you for doing that for the youth who need to hear these kind of things. But also, as you say, it draws a lot of parallels. I love The Last Jedi. It is the most divisive Star Wars film out there. I appreciate that. But I love it because although there's a couple of really annoying, stupid moments, and you're just like, why did you put that in there? If you'd have tweaked 3 scenes a little bit, then majority of issues wouldn't be there. The Leia space scene Megan despises, killing off Adam Akbar really quickly with no real anything. Like there's lots of little things that you could have just improved. But I think you're right there, which is, I'd not really considered it as much when you speak about, Luke's Jedi Temple that we see in, I think it's Book of Boba Fett. It might be a smidgen Mando, but I think it's mainly Book of Boba Fett.
Maybe a little, across.
And I think it's mentioned very briefly in Shadow of the Sith as well. It's an excellent book. But like, like Luke never grew up with Coruscant, and I wonder. In some of the comics, you kind of get little glimpses, but the Jedi Temple was completely gone by the time of post A New Hope, and I do wonder what Luke would have thought. The High Republic, they have a different outlook on things because they're a lot more accepting. Certain characters like Elzar Mann, they have dark side stuff going on, and then they learn from that. They grow. They have therapy centers almost. When Orla Jareni takes Elzar to just a random planet, it's like, right, you have problems with the dark side. Let's just spend ages talking about it and meditating on it and trying to work your way through. Whereas the prequel era Jedi were just like, don't be evil. But what if I have these urges? Just don't. and don't do it. And even Yoda,
Yeah.
like in Attack of the Clones, when Anakin comes to him, I think it's actually might be Revenge of the Sith, and he says, I'm having these nightmares, these dreams, what am I going to do? And he
Yeah.
says,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, just learn to let go. And you're like, problem solved. It's like the kind of equivalent of saying, I have depression, and go, just don't be sad. You're like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. And that's one of the biggest follies. And I think that in the Yoda comic series, the 10 issues, you see that Yoda's really struggling before Luke shows up on Dagobah. He's struggling because he feels like he failed in every way. And to be fair, he did quite a lot. But he feels responsible for the whole fall of the Jedi Order, which I don't think he's fully responsible, but he's definitely a part. And one of the big critiques that Dooku has against Yoda, I can't remember which, if it's in the book or Clone Wars or if it's sprinkled around the canon, but he says Yoda's been in the Order for so long that he can't even see when things are shifting beneath him. And I think that's what happens to certain other religious organizations as well. And, for all of my issues with the Catholic Church, for example, the most recent Pope has come out and has pushed the certain things forward. He said certain things like, homosexuals and atheists can go to heaven, and obviously all of us who already believe that, we're like, well, yeah, duh. But it's nice for them to kind of acknowledge that. It's nice for things like, for the Pope to say, okay, you can use condoms to prevent STIs, kind of coming with the times. And I've made jokes about the current Pope being, the HR guy of the Catholic Church. But in joking aside, it's still, reform is so important. And I think it's one of the reasons why, unlike certain other religions on this planet, Christianity is ever changing. Granted, because of Henry VIII, kind of splitting the church between Protestant and Catholics and things, that caused a rift, and that was kind of one of the trajectories. But Christianity is a religion that is often looking at itself. And, the majority of Christians I've met are very open-minded individuals. They don't necessarily stick to certain texts in the Bible that say certain very strongly opinionated Catholics might. And they're generally the people who are more aligned with the teaching of Jesus, which is love thy neighbor is rule number one. Everything else in the Bible kind of comes second. And for me, with the Jedi, I think people like Ezra and Kanan primarily, they're kind of, for me, they're the Force reformists that I really appreciate. They're the characters I connect to. Kanan's my favorite Star Wars character. Obi-Wan's pretty close, but Kanan is for me the GOAT. I absolutely adore him, and I'm just like and Ahsoka does this as well to a degree, and so does Ezra, encapsulating almost the Jesus side of Christianity as opposed to the Old Testament God side. Mace Windu for me represents the Old Testament. He's very dogmatic. He's right about the majority of things, and he is a badass. Like, don't get me wrong. Mace Windu is one of the coolest characters in all of Star Wars. However, he is also one of the contributing reasons why Anakin fell to the dark side. Especially in the Clone Wars, you see a lot of this hypocrisy. So for me, Mace Windu represents the Old Testament, and Kanan, and to a degree, kind of Obi-Wan. He's kind of in the middle. But Kanan, Ezra, and Ahsoka, they represent the New Testament, which are focusing not on these rules that were put into place hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. They're more like, no, all these rules only work if you follow the golden rule, which is be good, be moral, do not kill people unless you absolutely have to, unless there's no other choice. Yeah. And I've only just now in this conversation with you, really made that connection of kind of the Old and New Testament. And I really like it. I like that. I like the idea of religion. I like what it's trying at its core to be. I do genuinely believe, even historically, the religion has been used in a lot of ways to oppress people and control people. I genuinely believe it came from a good place. The majority of religious people are just trying to be good people. It's just certain rules and elements of certain doctrine get in the way of that. But I think that if you can supersede that, like the ways that the sort of Bokken Jedi do in a lot of ways, like Luke does in a lot of ways, it shows the best of what the Jedi could be. And I think that's the same with individuals like yourself, Christians, which are really openly acknowledging some of the problems that occurred and trying to move forward with the right teachings of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think because for me too, and I mean, I think even like, and I'll be interested, like I said, about like the new Jedi Order movie and all some of those things. And I mean, even when we get into the Mandoverse movie, how all that plays out, and if we see Luke, any of those, that sort of thing, and even I mean, we got the rest of Ahsoka and some other stuff. So, but just to see how that plays out, and I think for me, it's also like you said, like we have the golden rule, like Like for me, it's love God and then love your neighbor. Like how do I do that well? And like for me, my most important thing is like when I meet somebody who's not a Christian, it's not, hey, like what sin have you committed? It's, hey, how can I love you as somebody who's, in my perspective, created in God's image?
Mhm.
And so um yes, I believe like there is sin and we need to deal with that and all that sort of thing. And there's reasons behind that. But like let's get to that after the fact that I have a relationship with you and I know you and I care about you and you know that. And so like um yeah, I abide by what's in the Bible, but also with the idea that like Jesus loved first, and I'm going to do the same thing.